No one would have imagined that a humble meatball seller on a quiet beach in Indonesia would become the center of an incredible love story, one that would unite three souls from different worlds. His name was Sabar. He was 32 years old, with sun-kissed brown skin and a lean physique, not from gym workouts, but from years of pushing his heavy cart across sandy paths. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. Yet something about him touched hearts in ways no one expected. Sabar lived in a small coastal village on Sumbawa Island, West Nusa Tenggara. He had no social media, no smartphone, and no dreams of grandeur. What he did have was a quiet strength and a generous heart. Everyone in the village knew him, not because of wealth or status, but because of his kindness. He would help an elderly woman cross the street, fix a neighbor's leaking roof, or share a bowl of soup with a hungry child. He was known not for what he had, but for how he made people feel safe, seen, and respected. Each morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Sabar prepared his signature bakso, meatball soup. The ingredients were simple: chewy beef meatballs, a thin but flavorful broth, springy noodles, and a dash of fiery chili for those who dared. By 8 a.m., he would start pushing his cart towards the beach. The sound of wooden wheels creaking, mixed with the sea breeze and the distant call of fishermen, became part of the village's rhythm. Under a tall coconut tree where the white sand sparkled, Sabar would stop and set up his tiny stall. A wooden bench, 2 plastic chairs, and a handwritten menu were all he had. And yet it was enough. That day, everything seemed like any other, until 2 foreign women appeared. They had large backpacks slung over their shoulders, hats tilted back on their heads, and smiles wide with curiosity. Their names were Emily and Sophie, best friends from Australia who were backpacking across Indonesia. For 2 weeks, they had hopped from island to island, tasting local dishes, diving into clear waters, and soaking in every cultural detail they could find. But nothing caught their attention quite like the smell of Sabar's soup. "Excuse me, what is this?" Sophie asked, pointing to the steaming pot on Sabar's cart. "Bakso," Sabar replied with a soft smile. "Meatballs?" Emily asked with a laugh. Sabar nodded, gesturing for them to sit. His English was broken, but that didn't matter. They sat down, ordered 2 bowls. Emily went without chili, while Sophie dared to try the spicy version, and took their first bites. Their eyes widened. "This is amazing," Emily said. "It tastes like comfort," Sophie added, surprised. Sabar just smiled. He was used to compliments, but what he didn't know was that this moment, this ordinary meal on an ordinary day, was about to change all of their lives. From that day forward, Emily and Sophie kept coming back. Not once or twice, but every day. At first, it was just for the meatballs. But soon, it became something more. They would linger longer after their meal, chatting with Sabar, sometimes in English, sometimes with gestures. They'd laugh, joke, and even help him serve customers. Sabar didn't talk much, but his presence was calming, like a breeze after a hot day. He was the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. At first, Sabar didn't think much of their visits. He assumed they were just tourists enjoying village life. But then came the rain. One afternoon, the skies darkened and a heavy downpour trapped the 2 women under the same tree where Sabar worked. Seeing them shiver and clutch their bags, Sabar offered them shelter in his small bamboo hut on the edge of the beach. It was cramped, the roof leaked in places, and there wasn't much furniture. But there, huddled together, they began to share stories. Emily talked about her job as a nurse back in Sydney, and how the stress had worn her down. Sophie shared how she had lost her younger brother last year, and travel had become her way of healing. Their voices cracked with emotion. Sabar didn't understand everything, but he nodded gently. He knew pain when he saw it. From that rainy evening, the bond between the 3 deepened. Sophie and Emily began spending more time at Sabar's stall, not just as customers, but as helpers. They learned how to slice green onions, boil broth, and even mimic Sabar's sales pitch to locals. The villagers began to notice. Some smiled. Some whispered. Some were suspicious. And then came the invitation from the village chief. One evening, Sabar was summoned to a meeting at the chief's house. Several elders were present, their faces serious. Sabar, one of them began. We respect you. But your closeness with those foreign women is creating unrest. People are talking. You must clarify your intentions. Sabar was stunned. He lowered his gaze, choosing his words carefully. They are just friends. Nothing more. They help sometimes. That's all. But the elders were not convinced. The chief looked him in the eye and said, This village values tradition. You must be careful. This kind of relationship is unusual. People won't understand. Sabar nodded silently. Inside, his heart was conflicted. He had never intended for things to get complicated. Yet, he couldn't deny the bond that had formed. Emily and Sophie were no longer just visitors. They had become part of his routine, part of his life. The very next day, Emily and Sophie were also called to the village hall. With the help of a translator, they were questioned about their intentions. And it was there that everything changed. Sophie stood up, her voice steady. I want to stay. This village gives me peace. I want to learn about Islam. Everyone froze. Even Sabar was speechless. Then Emily added, Back in our country, we thought Islam was about hate. But being here, seeing the kindness, the community, the prayers, we realized how wrong we were. We want to understand this faith. We want to stay and learn. A stunned silence fell over the room. The elders looked at each other. Sabar lowered his eyes, feeling the weight of something much bigger than himself settling on his shoulders. It was no longer just about meatballs. It was about faith. It was about love. It was about fate. The news of Emily and Sophie's interest in Islam spread across the village like wildfire. From market stalls to mosque courtyards, everyone was talking. Some were amazed, even proud, that two white women from a faraway land wanted to learn the religion of the villagers. Others, however, grew skeptical. Their friendship with Sabar, already a topic of whispered curiosity, now became the center of an emotional storm. For Emily and Sophie, things began to shift quickly. They no longer dressed in their beach clothes. Instead, they wore modest long-sleeved shirts and simple cotton dresses. They began spending time with the women of the village, sitting on woven mats, learning how to read the Qur'an from elderly aunties. They listened, observed, and never once questioned the customs. They didn't act like tourists anymore. They were blending in, quietly, respectfully. But not everyone welcomed the change. Rumors thickened like tropical clouds before a storm. Some villagers claimed Sabar was hiding them in his home. Others swore they saw all three returning from the beach together late at night. Suspicion grew, and patience, both the virtue and the man, was wearing thin. Sabar tried to remain focused on his stall. He still pushed his cart to the beach, still served the same meatballs. But the smiles he once received from neighbors were now replaced by tight-lipped nods or averted gazes. The warmth of the village was cooling. At home, Emily and Sophie noticed the tension too. I think people are uncomfortable with us being here, Emily whispered one night. Sophie nodded. Do you think we're making Sabar's life harder? They sat in silence. Days passed. Then one evening, Sabar's mother arrived from the neighboring village. She was a short, weathered woman with eyes that had seen both joy and heartbreak. She came without warning and sat on the bamboo porch of her son's house. Sabar, she said quietly, I want the truth. Are you serious about those girls? Sabar didn't respond right away. His heart was pounding. Ma, he began softly. I never planned this. But they're kind, sincere. They've never asked for anything. They help. They learn. And yes, I care about them. Both. His mother sighed deeply. If they truly want to accept Islam, if they love you, and you love them, then you must make a decision. But remember, this isn't just about you anymore. This is about all of us. Her words hung heavy in the air. She didn't need to explain further. Sabar understood. The only way forward would be with courage, and consequences. 3 days later, on a quiet afternoon, Emily and Sophie came to visit. The sky was clouded, and the air was thick with unspoken emotion. They sat together on the porch, just like old times, but the laughter was missing. "We know we've put you in a difficult place," Emily said softly. "We never meant to make trouble," added Sophie. Sabar looked up, meeting their eyes. "But we've also talked," Sophie continued, "and we both agree. We love you. And we don't want to fight over who deserves you more. We're ready to share." Sabar's breath caught in his throat. "You mean? We're willing to marry you. Both of us. If that's what it takes to keep this bond respectful, lawful, and full of barakah." Sabar didn't respond for a long time. He just looked at them, these two women from another world, offering their hearts with pure honesty. His chest tightened. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of responsibility. That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat on the prayer mat, whispering du'as under his breath. "O Allah," he prayed, "I am just a simple man. I never asked for any of this. But if this is your qadr, then give me the strength to do it right." The next morning, he visited the village mosque, seeking guidance from the local ustaz. The ustaz listened silently, then said, "Sabar, your situation is rare, but not wrong. Islam allows a man to marry more than one wife, if he can be just. If their hearts are willing, and your niyah is clean, then go ahead. But be warned, this path is not easy." Sabar nodded. And so, a few weeks later, a monumental event took place. In the heart of the village, the front yard of the village chief was transformed into a small wedding venue. Bamboo chairs were set in rows. Colorful fabric shaded the space. The sun peeked through palm fronds as villagers gathered, some with joy, others with judgment. Emily and Sophie arrived wearing ivory kabayas, their faces glowing but simple. Their makeup was light, their smiles full of resolve. Sabar wore a crisp white cocoa shirt and a sarong passed down from his father. He looked nervous, but his eyes were clear. The marriage contracts were read aloud, one after the other. The imam asked the witnesses. The women gave their consent. Sabar accepted the marriages, legally and openly, in the presence of Allah and the community. As the imam pronounced the nikah complete, the sound of soft takbir echoed through the yard. Some clapped quietly. Some just watched. But Sabar didn't hear the whispers. All he felt was a quiet flame lighting inside him, not of pride, but of purpose. That evening, the three of them returned to their home. There were no fireworks. No extravagant feast. Just peace, and the knowledge that they had done the right thing. But peace, like the sea, is never still for long. The real test was just beginning. Some neighbors stopped saying salam. Others kept their children from playing nearby. One mother at the market was overheard whispering, "Outsiders come and marry too, and we're expected to smile?" Sabar heard all of it. He said nothing. Instead, he spent his energy making sure his household was balanced. He created schedules. He shared time fairly. Every Friday night, the three of them would sit together and talk, not just about chores, but about their feelings, their fears, their hopes. Still, pain lingered. One night, Sophie cried alone in her room. "I feel like we ruined his life," she whispered to Emily. Emily hugged her, but she, too, had doubts. "If this continues, maybe we should go back." Outside, Sabar sat on the beach, soaked in the midnight rain, praying silently. "O Allah, I chose love. But if I lose them both, what am I left with?" His heart, once full of light, now trembled in the storm. Rain fell like whispers from the sky that night, soaking the sand beneath Sabar's feet. He sat alone, legs crossed, facing the ocean's vast darkness. Every drop felt like a question. Was he right to marry them both? Could he protect their hearts from harm? Could he protect them from the world? In the weeks following the wedding, the household functioned with surprising grace. Emily and Sophie had found a rhythm, alternating cooking duties, organizing the small bamboo home, even joining Sabar at the market on different days to avoid tension. Sabar, true to his name, practiced endless patience, listening, learning, loving quietly. But outside their small world, whispers still followed. Children were told not to visit their house anymore. One elderly woman openly accused them of importing sin, and while no one dared confront them directly, the invisible wall between them and the rest of the village grew thicker. Emily, once bubbly and strong, began to withdraw. She stayed indoors, cooking or cleaning but rarely going out. When Sabar asked her about it, she only smiled faintly. "It's okay. I don't want to make things worse." Sophie, on the other hand, tried to push through. She would greet neighbors, offer help, even volunteer at the mosque's women's section. But the smiles she received in return were forced, thin, or missing altogether. It wasn't hatred. It was suspicion. And it was exhausting. One evening, during a shared dinner of fried fish and rice, Sophie broke the silence. "Do you think they'll ever accept us?" she asked. Sabar looked up from his plate. Emily didn't speak. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know we've done nothing wrong." Emily finally spoke, her voice shaking. "What if they never see it that way?" The silence that followed was louder than any answer. The next day, a ray of hope appeared in the form of Badaini, a middle-aged widow known in the village for her sharp tongue but surprisingly soft heart. She came to the house holding a bundle of cassava leaves. "I heard you grow morina in the back," she said to Emily. "It goes well with this." Emily was stunned for a moment, then smiled. "Thank you. I'd love to try cooking it." That was the first sign. Days later, Badaini invited them to a women's religious study circle at her home, held weekly near the rice fields. Emily and Sophie hesitated at first, but Sabar encouraged them. "Go. Show them who you are." That afternoon, the two women dressed modestly, light scarves, long sleeves, and walked to Bettini's home. The small hut smelled of fried shallots and lemongrass. A group of village women sat on mats, reading Qur'an and preparing food. At first, the atmosphere was awkward. But gradually, things warmed up. Sophie helped lay down extra mats. Emily chopped onions. When a toddler started crying, Emily gently picked him up and rocked him, whispering lullabies and broken baisa. One of the older women finally spoke. "You're not what I expected." Emily paused. "Neither were you," she replied with a soft smile. The room erupted in laughter. That day marked the beginning of acceptance. The children returned first. Curious and carefree, they wandered back to the house to see the foreign aunties. Sophie began teaching them crafts, simple origami, painting, and games. Emily organized small drawing lessons in the yard under the mango tree. Neighbors started waving again. Some brought food, ketupat sayur, sticky rice, fried bananas. The wall was not gone, but cracks were forming. Through those cracks, compassion began to shine. Sabar noticed the shift, but didn't grow complacent. Every day, he continued pushing his cart, now selling not only traditional meatballs but Emily's special, vegetable bakso, made with morina leaves. It was a hit at the nearby village market. Sophie helped him set up. Her bright accent and awkward Indonesian made people chuckle. "Bakso sihat. Bagus untuk stamina," she'd yell, pointing at the pot. Customers laughed, and they bought. Business improved. At night, the three of them would sit in the kitchen, laughing over spice experiments gone wrong, or softly singing folk songs Emily remembered from her childhood. One night, she fed Sabar a small meatball made with tofu and grinned. "They'll love this one." Sabar smiled and kissed her forehead. "Then we'll make it together tomorrow." They were not a perfect family. There were still arguments, small frictions between different cultures, habits, emotions. But their foundation was honesty. Whenever something felt off, they talked. They never let silence fester into distance. Jealousy came, of course. On some nights, Sophie would feel left out if Sabar spent more time with Emily. On others, Emily would struggle when Sophie shared old travel memories that she couldn't relate to. But instead of hiding it, they voiced it. They processed it together. "We didn't marry just a man," Sophie once said. "We married a life." And lives have storms. But perhaps the most beautiful part was how they stopped caring about what others thought. One morning, Sabar walked with both of them to the nearby hill, a quiet place they used to visit in secret before the marriage. Now, it was their place of gratitude. The breeze blew gently. The village shimmered below them, peaceful and green. "Look," said Sophie. "It's like the village is smiling now." Sabar looked at her, then at Emily, who sat beside him, leaning on his shoulder. "I used to think we wouldn't survive," Emily whispered. "But here we are." He held both their hands tightly. "You gave up your world to build one with me," he said. "I can never repay that." "You don't have to," Sophie replied. "Just never stop believing in us." And he didn't. That was the day he realized. The storm hadn't broken them. It had rooted them. 1 year had passed since the unusual marriage that once made headlines in every corner of the village. What began as whispers of scandal had now become part of the fabric of community storytelling, the kind of tale repeated at night markets and weddings, where people finally said, "Well, maybe it wasn't so strange after all." But the journey to reach this peace had not been easy. Inside their humble bamboo home, life for Sabar, Emily, and Sophie had settled into a rhythm. Each of them played their role, not as servants or superiors, but as equals, partners in responsibility, in faith, and in love. Sophie was the creative spark. She filled the house with color, hand-painted batik on the walls, little flower pots on the windowsill, and crafts made with the village children hanging like ornaments. She became known as the craft auntie by the neighborhood kids who often visited after school. Her Bahasa Indonesia had improved too, enough to tell jokes, give directions, and even scold a goat when it wandered into their yard. Emily, meanwhile, was the nurturer. Calm, composed, and dependable, she handled the kitchen like a professional. She developed her own versions of Indonesian recipes, blending local ingredients with health-conscious alternatives. Her special green bakso, packed with morina and tofu, became a village favorite. Mothers even started asking for her advice on child nutrition. Sabar, the once solitary man who sold meatballs by the sea, now found himself surrounded by laughter, shared meals, and purpose. He still rose before dawn to prepare the bakso soup, but now with Emily at his side, peeling garlic and humming softly. Sophie would wake up later and prep the cart or help organize supplies. They had become a small company, a family-run operation, both literally and emotionally. Despite the harmony, there were still moments when they had to remind each other of the road they'd taken. One afternoon, Emily sat alone, drawing under the shade of the jackfruit tree in their yard. Sabar noticed her quiet expression and sat beside her. "Thinking of home?" he asked gently. Emily nodded. "Sometimes I wonder what my family would say if they saw me now." Sabar didn't press. He knew she hadn't spoken to her parents in months. They hadn't understood her conversion. To them, it was betrayal. But to Emily it was liberation, finding a kind of peace no one in her world had ever shown her. "Do you regret it?" Sabar asked. She smiled, faint but firm. "Never. I regret only that they couldn't see what I see." Later that week, the family received an invitation from the village head. It was for a special event, the annual Cultural Harmony Festival. The village wanted to showcase stories of community strength and diversity. And this time, Sabar's story was at the center. At first, he resisted. "I'm not good at speaking," he protested. "And we're not special." But Emily and Sophie insisted. "You are," they said in unison. On the day of the event, the three of them dressed in matching batik outfits. Sabar wore a light brown shirt with intricate patterns across the chest. Emily wore a batik dress with soft earth tones. Sophie's version was more vibrant, reflecting her playful nature. As they arrived, heads turned, not with judgment this time, but with curiosity and respect. The event took place in the village square. Bamboo stalls lined the edges, filled with local snacks and crafts. A small stage had been set up near the banyan tree. As the sun dipped low, casting golden rays over the gathering, the village head stepped up and introduced Sabar. "Today," he announced. "We celebrate not just culture, but courage, the courage to love, to adapt, and to build bridges between people." Sabar stepped forward. His heart pounded. He looked out at the sea of familiar faces, many of whom had once turned away from him. He took a deep breath and spoke. "I was a meatball seller. That's all I was. Then 2 guests came to my stall, and they brought change." He paused, glancing at Emily and Sophie, who sat near the front, their eyes glistening. "I didn't change them. They changed me. With sincerity. With respect. With love for this religion, and for this village. And when the world outside doubted us, we held each other tighter." The crowd was silent, but not cold. A few nodded. A few smiled. "I didn't ask for this story. But Allah gave it to me. And I've learned, real love doesn't need to be explained to everyone. It just needs to be lived, with honesty." When he stepped down, the applause was soft, but it was real. That night the village square lit up with lanterns. Children ran around with sugarcane sticks. Music played from bamboo flutes. And Sabar, Emily, and Sophie walked through the crowd, hand in hand, not as outcasts, but as a family. Later, back at home, they sat under the stars on the porch. Sophie leaned her head on Sabar's shoulder. Emily rested her hand on his. "I didn't expect life to turn out this way," Sophie whispered. "But I'm glad it did." Sabar smiled. "Allah writes the best stories." Emily nodded. "Do you think it's finally over? The judgment?" Sabar thought for a moment. "Maybe not completely. But enough people now see our hearts. And that's enough for me." From inside the house, the sound of boiling broth gurgled on the stove. Tomorrow was another market day. Another chance to feed people. To smile. To keep going. What had started as a storm of gossip had become a quiet rain that nurtured roots. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were growing. Morning mist clung gently to the village paths as roosters crowed in the distance. The sun had just begun to rise when Sabar stood outside his home, sipping warm tea. The house behind him, once a simple bamboo hut, now buzzed with quiet life. Inside, Emily and Sophie were already awake, chatting softly as they folded laundry and prepared breakfast. It had been over a year since they stood before the village imam and made their vows. In that time, what began as an unexpected union had blossomed into something far more profound, a family, not bound only by marriage, but by shared purpose, faith, and resilience. Village life had changed around them too. The whispers that once followed them had grown faint, replaced by friendly nods in the market, and even waves from the very neighbors who had once turned their backs. Emily was no longer just a foreigner in a kabaya. She was now Ibya Emily, the one villagers trusted for herbal soup recipes and quiet advice. Sophie, with her joyful spirit and odd accent, had become a favorite among children, leading art sessions and laughter-filled story times under the jackfruit tree. Sabar, once a solitary man pushing a cart, now managed 2 stalls, one on the beach, the other at the weekly market. His meatballs, enhanced with Emily's nutrition tips and Sophie's creativity, had become known not just for taste, but for warmth. And yet, even with this peace, life never stopped testing them. One afternoon, as they returned from the market, Sabar noticed a letter had been slipped under their door. He opened it, and his brow furrowed. "It's from your mother," he said to Emily, handing it to her. Emily read it slowly. It was the first time in months she had heard from her family. The letter wasn't warm, but it wasn't hateful either. Her mother wrote with curiosity, confused about Emily's choices, skeptical about her conversion, but clearly still loving her daughter in her own restrained way. "She wants to visit," Emily said, stunned. Sophie clapped her hands. "That's a good sign." Sabar said nothing but nodded gently. He knew what this could mean, not just for Emily, but for all of them. The West was watching now, and the small life they had built might be questioned, judged, even misunderstood. 2 weeks later, Emily's mother arrived. A tall woman in her late 60s, dressed in neutral colors, with a polite but cautious expression. She stepped into the home like one walks into a museum, hesitant, curious, ready to judge. But what she saw confused her. She saw harmony. She saw Sophie joking with children in the yard, helping them fold colored paper into butterflies. She saw Emily, her own daughter, wearing a soft hijab, kneeling beside a pot of boiling soup, calm and graceful. She saw Sabar, not as a threat, but as a quiet, respectful man, treating both women with gentleness and dignity. For 2 days she said little. But on the third morning, she sat with Sabar on the porch while the others cooked. "My daughter, she was always restless," she began. "She seems calm now," Sabar said simply. "She does." There was a long pause. "I still don't understand this marriage. This life. But I can't deny, she looks happy." Sabar smiled. "That's all I want." Later that day, she asked Emily, "Do you miss home?" Emily took her hand. "I don't miss a place. I miss people. But Mom, I'm finally where I feel safe. Loved. Guided." Her mother didn't cry. But her lips trembled. When she left 3 days later, she hugged both her daughter and Sophie tightly, and even shook Sabar's hand firmly. "Take care of them," she said. He promised he would. As time went on, more villagers began to open their hearts. The turning point came when the village school invited Sophie to paint a mural on the courtyard wall. She spent weeks sketching, and the final result was breathtaking, a depiction of village life, children, elders, fishermen, rice fields, and in the corner, a humble meatball cart under a coconut tree. Below it, she painted one word in Indonesian: ikhlas. Sincerity. People began to see their story not as scandal, but as a rare example of what could happen when love and faith coexisted with humility and honesty. And then came another surprise. One evening, as the stars blinked gently above the village sky, Sophie placed Sabar's hand over her stomach. He looked at her, puzzled. "I'm late," she whispered with a smile. His eyes widened. Then Emily joined them, her arms wrapping around both. "We prayed for this," she said softly. "Now Allah has answered." Tears welled up in Sabar's eyes. That night, as the three of them sat in silence, looking up at the sky, Emily asked, "What will we name the baby?" Sabar took a long breath. Then he smiled. "Nur Hidayah, the light of guidance." And so it was. The village that once feared their bond now prepared to welcome its smallest miracle. Sophie's belly grew. Emily became her caretaker, rubbing her back, cooking herbal soups, reading Qur'an aloud every night. Sabar balanced work and home with new energy, counting months with eager joy. When Nur Hidayah was born, a beautiful baby girl with eyes like her mother's and calm like her father's, the village women came with food, cloths, and prayers. The village chief brought a small Qur'an for her. But Tiny kissed her forehead and whispered, "She will change more than just this house." And she did. In the end, this was not just a love story. It was a story of bridges built between people and cultures. Of how two women followed their hearts not to escape their world, but to find a better one. Of how a quiet man, with no wealth or fame, became the center of a home filled with joy, trials, and barakah. And from that corner of Indonesia, under the shade of a coconut tree, a new story began, not one of scandal or spectacle, but of sincerity, sacrifice, and the purest kind of love. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary lives begin with something as simple as a bowl of meatballs.